Welcome to RHI's Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today we are here with Alicia Scholer, Vice President of Responsible Hospitality Institute. In her role, she has managed multiple city assessments, assisted in planning RHI's annual events, and presented her research findings on women's safety at international events.
Hello, Alicia. So great to have this interview after 20 years, huh? Maybe you could give a little bit of background of your work with RHI over the last 20 years and how you came to be talking about women's issues.
Sure, Jim. Thanks so much. Well, I've worked for RHI for nearly 20 years now. I started as a student and then took on the role of communications coordinator, later project manager, and most recently vice president for the past 5 years. So I've really had an opportunity to be involved in all aspects of what we do, helping to coordinate our annual Sociable Cities Summit. I've also developed several publications including the first practical guide for planning, managing, and policing hospitality zones, as well as a guide for public safety and policing in nightlife districts. And being in charge of consultation services, overseeing that process, I have had the privilege of going on site to 36 different cities in 24 states and provinces in the US, Canada, and Mexico.
Well, that's a pretty impressive background. So you obviously spent a lot of time working locally in cities and also gathering information from all of the events that you've helped to organize and all the speakers that you worked with. But what specifically motivated you to incorporate women's perspective into the work that you're doing with cities?
Sure. It felt like there was a dimension of the question of public safety that was missing. And that's why it was so important to incorporate in women's voices about what makes them feel safe when they go out at night to socialize, because women tend to be more attuned to their environment, more sensitive to different cues in the environment and within social venues about what makes them feel safe or unsafe. And I think that when I started asking women about what made them feel safe versus unsafe, I think it was pretty astounding to see how much the things that they shared anecdotally actually aligned with what research proves makes an environment safer and more vibrant.
In the discovery of this work that you've kind of organized into really one of the most comprehensive that I've seen, what specifically can you get to be more specific about what your findings have revealed about women's experiences and safety in nightlife?
Sure. So I think that what has been the most eye-opening is the level of decision making and preparation that women and people who identify or present as women go through before they go out at night to socialize. So the kind of matrix of decision making that they have, thinking about how am I going to get to this place? How am I going to get home? Is public transportation going to be closed by then? If I drive, who's going to be kind of our our designated driver, will be safe, as well as things like a woman, many women have told me they would never get into an elevator with a lone man in that elevator. They would cross the street, if a group of men were approaching them. And I think that these insights have been really important to share in a more inclusive audience, to make sure that people who identify as men understand that, as well as the kind of rituals that many women go through before going out at night. Many women are not even bringing purses anymore because they're afraid of them, getting stolen. Some women always carry mace with them when they go out. They hold their keys a certain way when they approach their vehicle. Things like, a woman will often text their friend to make sure that they got home safely after they get home. And making sure to ask, men, I mean, how common is that experience for people who identify as men? And it's very rare. So really, making sure that, that women's experiences and their particular preferences, especially with mobility, equality are validated, are heard, and that cities can really elevate the downtown experience to make sure that women in particular feel safer. Because if people who identify as women feel safer, then other vulnerable subgroups are also going to feel safer and benefit from that enhanced experience.
So have you been able to talk with groups of men or men individually about these findings and in those discussions, what have you learned from the man's perspective?
I think that really it's been more that men, have been attending women's safety workshops that I've been presenting and that sort of thing. I think that they listen, they observe, they bring this information back. I think that they ask the women in their lives to kind of confirm many of these things. It's often just not on their radar. There are granted more progressive men out there, but I think it's really just about awareness raising amongst people who are men. And then,
Mhm.
in particular, for male venue owners, because with bars, clubs, live music venues, it is primarily still a very male-dominated landscape for ownership. Really trying to educate those particular venue owners and operators about the importance of one particular factor in their establishment, which is the restroom. That is probably the number one most common topic that comes up in these focus groups. It is not only, a matter of safety, making sure that there's a safe passageway to get to the restroom, but also that it's clean. I have heard so many women, in my personal life as well as during focus groups, say that they would never go back to an establishment because the restroom was so terrible that beyond just not well stocked, doors not locking, that sort of thing. I've heard women say that they would never order a drink from glassware if the bathroom was messy. So, venue owners are potentially missing out on revenue opportunities. And that's often the most overlooked space in their venue, but it's actually very important for the female experience.
Well, a lot of these issues that you're talking about relate to safety and cleanliness and just a feeling of comfort. But what about what women want in terms of choices, and what do they want in terms of the venue and the setup and music and dance and food and drinks and all that other stuff? I mean, clearly there's another aspect of this. If you're trying to talk to venue owners to make their places safer, what's the economic benefit to them of having women patrons who come and feel safe?
Well, I think there are a few different issues that you brought up. I mean, there's the theory that if women don't want to come to your venue, then men are not going to come to your venue as well. But in terms of what women are looking for, it really does depend on the life stage that you're at. Younger, as Jim, you've mentioned the singles, mingles, families, and jingles. So when you're a young single and something in your 20s, you really are looking for more of that open space, dim lighting, loud music. There's more of a reliance on alcohol as a form of liquid courage, because they're very nervous about striking up conversations. And then once you get to the life stage of a mingle, where you've really paired off, you have friend groups, you may be in a couple, you tend to prefer more comfortable seating, you have more disposable income, you tend to want higher quality food and drink, as well as lower level of sound, so you can actually have a conversation. And then once you get into the family stage, you're looking for more like booth seating, earlier evening hours. You want to socialize still, but you want to bring your kids, so it's got to be kind of more of an open space in case they do need to run around. And then once you get to that jingle stage, having that additional disposable income, you may be an empty nester, a business traveler, so really looking for those premium beverages, premium foods as well. So it definitely depends on life stage, but some of the things I've heard that are very specific to women are having a lot of variety, as you mentioned. So having, beverages that, that having a variety on the menu of mocktails, of, lower alcohol beverages to, classy cocktails, and that sort of thing, as well as, beer and wine. So, having more variety is something that's really important for women, as well as a variety of food options, small bites, healthy things that, women don't want to just eat a hot dog, if it's later at night. And having more of an experience, having an environment that's visually appealing so that you can take those Instagram photos that you want to share with your social network, as well as having kind of more of an experience when you're going out, that people don't want to just sit at a bar stool and stare at a shelf of alcohol. They want to do things. So that's why the rise of things like active socializing, where you are playing table tennis, you're playing mini golf, that sort of thing, board games, these kinds of experiences really facilitate that socializing, that social aspect.
Hmm. Well, you make this so complicated. If I'm a bar owner, I mean, couldn't I just have, ladies drink free type of a promotion? That makes it so much simpler for me.
Well, I think it depends on what life stage, what generation you're trying to capture, what, market, what the business plan is and whatnot, and really trying to set yourself apart by not just replicating the same business model as your neighbor down the street, doing something a little bit more interesting, especially, in with this current generation with Gen Z in particular. They're known for being more comfortable in a home setting, doing house parties, Netflix and chilling at home, getting Uber Eats in. So it really takes a lot of, something that's very interesting, very unique to draw them in particular out.
Well, you mentioned the various life stages, and more specifically, I think focusing in on the singles, the way you talked about it, that big open space where there's dancing, and that they look for cheap alcohol to most bolster their courage, particularly young men. And so now you're dealing with like a dance floor and people are dancing, and there's kind of a sexual undertone to dance, and a part of it is the showing off your stuff, as some people might say. But then there's growing concerns about sexual harassment, sexual assault, and unwanted touching or dancing in inappropriate ways. And so there's the challenge, I think, of managing this kind of high intensity period of time of people's lives where you're putting them together into a social setting mixed with alcohol and in some cases other drugs. And what you're saying is you have all of these responsibilities that women have to think about from the moment that they get dressed and pack to go out for the evening to how they're going to leave and get home safely. But what do you say about that moment on the dance floor where there's greater potential for, both the flirtation, which can end up being harassment, and what's the responsibility of the venue operators and the security to manage some of this risk? And what have you seen being done to kind of respond to these situations?
Sure, that's a great question. I think that there's a lot that has been done. There are a lot of great models out there. Big shout out to what Bristol Knights is doing in terms of the women's safety charter that they have. But in general, I think that the frustration that I hear from a lot of women is that a lot of the kind of sexual, violence prevention language is really directed to women, and women are, comprise the majority of victims of that experience. Despite the low reporting rates of those incidences for sexual assault and definitely for sexual harassment. So we're really trying, there's really a movement to try and place, the onus of that responsibility back, to venue operators. So when I was recently at a conference in Sydney, Australia called Neon Forum, they talk a lot about first making sure that an environment is safer for employees, to make sure that they are experiencing a safe workplace, because hospitality environments do tend to have more toxic masculinity and more incidences. They're much more likely to experience sexual harassment than in other workplaces. So really teaching employees first on how to recognize inappropriate behavior, how to appropriately respond to report those incidences, and when employees can keep each other safe, when they feel empowered to keep their workplace safe, they're more likely to then be able to keep their patrons and customers safe, because they can apply those same tools. So a lot of it is vigilance from the staff, making sure that the owner and manager have really bought into that concept of making sure that women, both as employees and patrons, feel safe. And it goes a lot farther than just putting up, say, a poster in the bathroom for angel shots, like what we have in the US, or Ask for Angela, which is what they have in the UK, a code word campaign that basically indicates, that someone needs help. And first, there, it can be very problematic, because are all the staff trained in that venue? Is every venue trained in a district? Does everyone know how that works? And it also places the responsibility of being able to report that on the victim, when there's various trauma responses. There's fight, flight, and freeze. So that's why it's so important for staff to be, vigilant about recognizing the signs of predatory behavior. And again, that, these environments are more sexualized. There is that level that you mentioned of dancing and flirtation. And I think the key factor in consent is that it's mutual, that it's wanted, versus one-sided, unwanted attention, persistence and following someone around and not being respecting when they do say, please stop doing that, for me. And I'd also like to just recognize that it's not just people who identify as women. The LGBT population is far more likely to experience sexual harassment. So when you add on those different layers and intersections of race, ethnicity, culture, of sexual orientation, gender identity, that there are a lot of factors that make certain groups more vulnerable to sexual harassment and assault.
Well, when you bring that up, and you mentioned that term toxic masculinity, I mean, just recently in the news, you've seen both the shift on Twitter to X, uh, and the removal of a lot of their monitoring regarding sexualized content or racist content. Now you see Facebook, and there's even several points that Facebook and is also transitioning to removal of some of these kind of electronic barriers that kind of limited some of this toxic masculinity from entering the dialogue of people. And if that's going to be happening in social media and the floodgates are open, with all your experience now and what you've seen as you go out to these nightlife venues, do you fear that maybe the male perspective and the male orientation may become even more problematic to educate about these issues that women face? How do you see this cultural shift that's happening in the work that you and others do to try to suppress some of this toxic masculinity and the aggressive behavior that is kind of beginning to rise up again?
Well, it's definitely worrisome. It's something that, I've definitely talked, to people in who do this kind of work, that we're all very concerned, about the rise of, people being able to use more misogynistic speech in social media platforms. I mean, unfortunately, it has always, managed to kind of slip through the cracks of filters. And so it is concerning that it will be easier potentially for that to take place. But I think it's really about having buy-in from the top, from on a citywide level, recognition of the need for greater safeguards for women's safety, and having that become more normalized, especially in socializing environments. Venue operators, staff, door security, all have an opportunity to set the tone for how people behave and to not accept inappropriate behavior towards anyone based on, their sex or gender and many other factors.
Well, you raise a lot of good kind of strategies that can be taken and ways in which women are seeking certain environmental changes. Now, I know you're going to be doing a presentation at the summit on in collaboration with Macarena Vargas, who's the president of the International Septet Association. So Septet is clearly a policing tactic or a planning tactic that can be incorporated into nightlife. And so you've got the venues themselves, but then as much as can be done within the venue, educating the staff, having the commitment from the top, having safe spaces or ways in which women can seek assistance if they're being threatened by any male, and proactive engagement to reduce that kind of harassment. But once they walk out the door and they go to their car, they go to public transit or wherever they're going, there's a whole nother realm that they have to navigate. So beyond the venue itself, what do you see is required in the public space that cities have to pay attention to if they want to make venues more attractive for women, and then women would feel more comfortable going?
Sure. Well, really striving for a more seamless experience from the time that someone arrives to a district or a cluster where venues are, either by transport, by Uber or Lyft, or, by their own personal vehicle to, the point where they go to that venue is really important. And, facilitating that seamless experience. There are a lot of environmental factors to be considered in terms of lighting. Just having a well-lit district isn't enough. You have to really study the patterns of movement of how do people actually access your district, from which parking areas are they going. Women in particular tend to really avoid parking garages. They really tend to get a bad reputation for being intimidating, so they tend to go for more street parking. Unfortunately, those areas can be more dimly lit, however, so it's very tricky. Having other kind of systems of kind of organization, things like having wayfinding signage, having, twinkle lights, not having to pass by a series of vacant, dimly lit storefronts is really big. And, I think there's a common misperception that women may want, say, more uniformed police. Well, that's a really important part of the equation for safety. There's also an opportunity for, just civilian forms of public safety, having ambassadors patrolling the streets, people who are a little bit easier or feel welcoming to approach if you have a question, having parking lot attendants. These are all different signs that, people are watching, that their eyes on the street, that are really important.
Well, this has been great, Alicia. You've covered an awful lot of ground, and I think a lot of useful information for people. And what is your expectation of the future of the ways in which venues and their patron will be able to coexist in a much more positive and productive way? Do you feel hopeful?
I do. I certainly hope that that we have a bright future ahead of us for socializing. And socializing is a human need to be able to interact. And then going out at night is one of the pivotal experiences that we all have throughout our life. We celebrate many of our milestones at venues. A lot of people don't have, sufficient space to be able to host, social events in their own home. And it adds an element of fun and excitement to be able to go out. So I certainly hope that, we can continue to provide, excellent experiences for people who identify all across the gender spectrum.
Wow, this has been great, Alicia, and thank you for taking the time. And I'm sure that your guidance will help a lot of people.
Thank you. I appreciate it.